It started as a routine hearing in the hushed halls of the Supreme Court chamber. But within minutes, the temperature of the room began to rise. Jasmine Crockett, the fiery Congresswoman known for her sharp tongue and uncompromising stance, had been called to testify before the bench. On this day, Justice Sonia Sotomayor presided with her usual calm demeanor, prepared for legal formalities. But as Jasmine began to speak, her tone suggested that this would be no ordinary testimony. The courtroom leaned in as Jasmine refused to be boxed in by the structure of the hearing, speaking passionately about judicial overreach and calling out what she described as selective scrutiny. Justice Sotomayor interrupted, trying to steer her back on topic. "Ms. Crockett, please keep your remarks relevant to the matter at hand," she said. "Yes." But Jasmine stood her ground, her eyes locking with the justice's. "With all due respect, Justice, relevancy is subjective when truth is being restrained." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as Sotomayor's expression stiffened. She gave a small nod, as if signaling for composure, but Jasmine was not one to be calmed easily. Her voice sharpened, and her language took on a tone rarely heard in the hallowed chamber, demanding answers rather than giving them. Her testimony was no longer just a statement. It was a challenge to power. Sotomayor leaned slightly forward, the weight of the moment beginning to show in her posture. "Ms. Crockett, this is not a rally. You're speaking before the highest court in the land, not a town hall meeting." The subtle rebuke was meant to reassert authority, but Jasmine, rather than retreat, doubled down. "That's exactly why I'm speaking this way, Justice. Because when the highest court can't hear the voice of the people in its rawest form, we've already lost." The gasps were louder now, as staffers and observers looked at each other wide-eyed. Sotomayor narrowed her gaze, choosing her next words carefully. "You will show decorum, or I will have to request your removal." Jasmine didn't flinch. "You can remove me from this chamber, but you can't remove the truth from this country's conscience," she said, standing taller, refusing to yield. "If this court is uncomfortable with my voice, then maybe it should examine what about. It causes such discomfort." It was not just her words, but the clarity with which she delivered them that began to fracture the usual calm of the room. Clerks sat frozen in place, unsure whether to take notes or brace for disruption. Sotomayor sat back slightly, folding her hands. Her silence now spoke louder than her commands earlier. Jasmine's reply had not just defied the court, it had forced a reflection of its role and relevance. The tension was now palpable. Sotomayor, with decades of judicial experience, was not easily rattled. But even she understood that something unusual was unfolding. "This hearing is not a platform for political statements," she reminded gently, hoping reason could temper the storm. Jasmine smiled wryly. "Justice Sotomayor, I would love nothing more than to stick to legal procedure. But when legal procedure is used to silence dissent, then it becomes political by design." A hush fell as she continued. "I respect the law, but I fear its selective application. I honor this court, but I question its current compass." Sotomayor's lips tightened. She looked down at the bench, fingers tapping once, a rare tell that the courtroom wasn't used to seeing. Jasmine sensed it too. "You don't have to agree with me," she said, her voice softening just slightly. "But you can't deny the truth of what's happening outside these walls. People are losing faith, and not because of chaos, but because of silence." The judge's jaw clenched. The other justices remained quiet, letting Sotomayor handle the clash, though their eyes betrayed a growing unease. Jasmine's words were not just defiant, they were surgical, cutting through institutional decorum and exposing fragility beneath it. Sotomayor raised her hand, calling for a short recess. But Jasmine's voice rose again before the gavel could fall. "No. Don't recess this truth," she declared. "This chamber has heard hours of monotony, but now that someone's heart is speaking, it's too much." The judge paused, gavel hovering. She sighed and lowered it. "Miss Crockett," briefly. Jasmine nodded, appreciating the space, and went on. "I am here representing voices who don't get this seat. Mothers, workers, voters, young people, they don't get to speak in chambers like these. They don't have access to institutions. So I carry them in my throat when I speak, and no institution will silence them through me. Her words resonated like a sermon. Even those who disagreed with her couldn't ignore the conviction. And let's not pretend this institution hasn't had its missteps, she said, glancing around. Dred Scott was once law. Plessy v. Ferguson was once law. Law doesn't always mean justice. At that, Sotomayor finally spoke again, softly. Be careful comparing the past to the present. Jasmine tilted her head. Justice. The past is the present, for many who haven't seen the change others take for granted. Her calm, measured cadence now replaced the earlier fire, not because she had weakened, but because her message had landed. The courtroom had grown still. Even the security guards seemed frozen, unsure whether they might need to act or simply witness. Sotomayor looked to her colleagues, then back to Jasmine. Are you saying this court has failed in its duty? She asked, her voice low but direct. Jasmine didn't blink. I'm saying that when the court acts as a gatekeeper instead of a guardian, it strays from its purpose. That line hit like a hammer. The weight of her words seemed to pull the air from the room. Sotomayor took a deep breath. Words carry consequences, Ms. Crockett. Boldness doesn't always equal truth. Jasmine nodded. Silence almost. Always equals complicity. And I choose boldness. Her stance, her poise was that of someone who knew the stakes and welcomed them. She wasn't just making a point. She was drawing a line. Her reply had shifted the tone permanently. This wasn't just a fiery back and forth. This was a moment that would be quoted, dissected, and remembered. I didn't. And as the court sat with the silence that followed, Jasmine simply returned to her chair. Her message hanging in the air like a challenge no one dared to dismiss. Justice. Sotomayor leaned back and finally allowed herself a breath. Her measured exterior remained, but there was now a glint in her eye, not of anger, but of realization. The confrontation had become something bigger than a procedural clash. You've made your views clear, she said carefully. Jasmine replied calmly, then let them echo outside this chamber too. Sotomayor nodded once, then turned to address the courtroom. Let the record reflect the remarks. The court is not unaware of the tensions outside these walls. The concession, though quiet, was historic in tone. Jasmine had not come to be disruptive. She had come to demand visibility. The exchange marked a rare moment of direct challenge within the Supreme Court, and it was clear from the faces in the gallery that this moment had shaken tradition. Cameras, though not allowed in the room, were surely recording history and memory. Clerks scribbled furiously. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was reverent. Sotomayor finally declared a recess, but this time, no one rushed to leave. Jasmine remained seated, her head high, eyes calm. The justice rose and left the bench, but not before glancing back once, not in judgment, but in recognition.